The poorer you are, the more money is made from your eyes. That's because there's a higher volume, higher frequency of commercial images that's distributed, which means there's more impression, which is exactly how money is made, which is there's more value extracted, so those populations are actually more profitable.
Wow.
So that's visual economics, and it's something that I care deeply about. And I think once we start understanding, within this, we start to also understand the current inequalities in the art world. Who gets to see what? I think that's really what I focus on since I'm in the art world. And I think what I want to change is I want us to have more freedom in what we can see. I want us to, not just me in a very privileged neighborhood, to see a bit of art with my kids and architecture and museums, but actually that chance and that privilege to be spread on to everybody else, especially because we know that watching commercial imagery is detrimental to our mental health. Looking at art and nature is the opposite, right? So you're really like saying, not only would I make money from you, but I would also harm your mental health. So it's a very criminal act in my head. So I always look at inequalities, and I think the two ways we tackle it is discussing that visual pollution I just mentioned and visual inequalities, and on the other end is empowering people to be visually literate, because they have rights. You have visual rights. You know, at no point you just have to accept that yet there's a billboard goes on your street. That by definition, that's a civic space. You can counter that. And so I want people to be aware of their rights because I want them to counter. And as we know, being educated about your rights is usually something that you have when you're privileged. So it's really how do you readdress this lack of education. And I also want people to not be manipulated so easily, which comes next, I think, on that generation of our kids. And on the other side, which is slowly happening with the EU and the Supreme Court in Switzerland, is having regulations around how much imagery is being put. Just like the digital space is, how do we protect our brains, especially the brains of our kids, and what kind of visual content do we put forward?
Yeah, and even to follow on from that, social media, which is going to be our kids' probably future things that they're going to see, and they're pumping out so much imagery in there. You know, how do you think that's changing in humans emotionally, mentally, if they're doing it on billboards? How are they developing that online as well?
So yes, I think, again, if you take back that kid who grows up in an underprivileged area, not even mentioning that most of what he will see commercially or she will see is gambling, fast food, fast fashion. So it's a very specific type of commercial images. But that kid walks to school, has seen hundreds of images like this, looks on his phone, same. So it's an endless loop, which gets to about 10,000 images consumed daily, 99% of them being commercial. So, you know, that kid might go to the museum once a month, thanks to the school, if lucky. That's not going to counter it. And that's the reason for us public art, again, is so essential, because I want to be the first place before the museum, because I'm aware that you might only come to the museum a few times a year, and that's not enough to counter that visual content. Whereas public art hopefully can do more. I think from that input of content, I mean, no brain can survive an input of 10,000 images every single day. It's too much. I think all of us are overwhelmed with how much content you are consuming. I think we're all dealing with it at every age. I've seen for me just a difference of, you know, I dance ballet on a regular basis throughout the week, and just having now got those very clear windows of an hour and a half without looking at my phone, how incredible my brain has changed. Like, it's rewired. It's the focus, the input for creativity, strategy, even the way I can take difficult conversations. I'm less triggered. You know, someone is bringing up an uncomfortable topic, I have space to welcome it, body and mental health wise. Which, if you remove that, I think with the overwhelming amount of content you consume, you don't have that space. You feel so much triggered so much faster. So I think, in general, as we know, it's about moderation. There's nothing about banning, but it is about how can you consume less. On streets, if you're privileged enough that you can change streets on your commute, I would advise that. You know, I live next to Oxford Street, but I can take the back street instead. So just little things like this makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
And then just being conscious about, you know, I have these new insecurities of this strong desire to suddenly do a certain thing. I mean, like for girls right now is Pilates, right? Everyone does Pilates. But maybe it's because I have seen hundreds of Pilates images everywhere, right? So before you rush into a new urge, I'm not saying you shouldn't do Pilates, but more saying try and track it back to the amount of visual content you may have, just not even realizing it, that you have consumed on that topic. And the reason suddenly you have such surge and urge to act on it.
Wow. I've consumed so much food bloggers.
I mean, I love food.
So now I'm just like, I want to try every single restaurant. So I definitely am a victim of the overconsumption of something. But at least it's positive in that sense. But I definitely can see how it could be extreme for another person if they're consuming so much negative things. Still talking about the space of tech and consumption, AI and creative ownership. What worries you the most and where do you think it's heading? I know you've done some positive AI projects yourself.
Yeah.
But where do you think it's heading now that everybody has access to prompt create something that someone worked extremely hard for and they can just do it like that?
So I think initially my views, because we were the first to ever represent artists, were AI artists from a few years back that had sold at Christie's for just under $500,000 called Obvious, 2018. So we were the first to represent artists that were generating AI imagery and selling them. I was quite moderated about it to start with because I saw that as yet another way in which the artist could experiment. Then I started to be educated about the sustainable impact, which our artist Ed Burtonski speaks a lot about. So that worried me in terms of use of resources, and we're seeing that geopolitically on how our resources are creating so many new conflicts now. And so obviously got educated about this. I started to worry more about that and refrain a bit more from encouraging artists to use it. Then I started to, and that was all through the course of a few years, started to research more on the IP and so how poor and vague our IP laws still are. And by definition, therefore, and we already had this with our photographer, how little protection artists were receiving when people were training on their own images and the difficulty around the compensation aspect. So you have, you have ethical ways to be an artist using AI. You can make sure that you get cultural consent for the images that you use. You can make sure that you train your models and build it on archival imagery. I think there are ways to do it, but I think I am strongly more on the negative side now. Because there's a new part that I've observed the last year is the effect on my team. And in fact, I've had to partially change my team as a result. And, MIT published a report on the cognitive impact that AI had on the brain of people who use it all the time. The problem is that we clearly love convenience, right? We're all lazy out there. Whenever there's something, that's what Deliveroo and Uber Eats did so well. If you got something that can get to your door, why would you walk to your shop to try and get it? And if there's a crutch to be lazy and something that's convenient, then we lean in towards it. The problem comes when we are creative and intellectuals, when we are meant to exercise our brain on a very regular basis to come up with the very best of intellectual output. So I didn't use ChatGPT or Claude, and I still don't use it. Obviously, my company will have processes that are using AI to maximize productivity, but I personally don't write using both. Not saying you shouldn't. I'm sure I'm an extreme case in the demographic of people. But I think by being a non-user and witnessing my team who were, for some of them, addicted to using it, that's really when I started to see the largest concern. And I think the reports of MIT came after this. But it's memory ability started dropping off. Because if you just put that recording, AI taking notes, although, of course, you should still be paying just as much attention by default, where you start witnessing as people listen less attentively. But it's not just the act of listening, as we know, it's also the act of taking notes after, having really clearly articulated ideas and having a strong call to action. That's the whole intellectual abilities. As I started witnessing this dropping off by a cliff, then the other one was ability to quickly connect the dots on a specific ideas or that intellectual creativity drops off the cliff. everything that they had perfectly put together, and I'm sure you've done that experience yourself, it looked beautiful. If an hour later I was asking what they had written, they generally could not remember. And that's when I thought, whoa, actually, the brain rot is creating
Yeah.
is joining what happened with social media, where it's actually making us more stupid than it is, by definition. And that's when, now is coming out when the first MIT reports are coming up with, 45% of cognitive ability is decreasing because of the use.